Welcome to another exciting episode of the GeoTrip. Joining us today is none other than Cameron Muskelly. Cameron is a science communicator and a self-taught paleontologist focused on historical geology and paleontology, i.e. fossils, of the Appalachian Basin located in the U.S. state of Georgia. Cameron has educated the public on Georgia's fossil record and why the study of paleontology is important. So, Cameron, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
So, to begin, please just let our listeners know a bit about you and your geo story. What brought you into the geosciences?
So, I really got interested in geoscience and paleontology, I would say probably when I was 3 years old, about kind of getting a fascination with dinosaurs. So, I grew up wanting to study paleontology through my fascination with dinosaurs. I was that kid who was obsessed with dinosaurs growing up. I could rattle off almost every single dinosaur name out of a magazine or a children's book. And I grew up watching documentaries and movies about dinosaurs. And it really wasn't until maybe around 7 years old that I got fascinated with understanding the earth. So I started collecting rocks and minerals, and I started to teach myself as much as I could on like the basics of geology, fossil identification, and mineral identification. In fact, around that age, I went into a classroom at school, and I went into the classroom, and a teacher had a personal fossil collection. I still remember her name to this day. In fact, we just met up last year for the first time in, I would say, probably maybe 15 years. Her name was Miss Davis, and she had a fossil collection in her classroom. And she introduced me um, the concepts of what fossils were and how fossilization works. Got to actually pick up and touch real fossils. I really only got to see fossils reading books or maybe going into a museum, but I've never actually got to hold fossil specimens before. And that really made my understanding of paleontology a lot more greater because you can look at the stuff and you can read it all day long. But when you actually interact with the specimens themselves, it becomes a much more deeper connection. And so after that, I was really connected with that. And I went to go on to find other things, but I really stuck with understanding how the earth has changed through time. And so as I have gotten older, I started to read more books and learn a lot more about the history of the earth and realize that I think I want to study paleontology. I think I want to dedicate my life to understanding how life on earth has changed through deep time.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Cameron. But it leads me to like another question. What made you decide to go down the self-taught route, instead of necessarily going through tertiary education, if my understanding is correct? Because I believe you said you were inspired and just kind of became self-learned, and you are an amazing powerhouse in paleontology. So, kind of want to know what influenced your decision.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So I'm on the autism spectrum disorder. I have ASD. And so I've struggled a lot through learning throughout the academic route. And I realized that being on the spectrum allowed me to take in a lot more information that a lot of people can't at a particular rate. And so as I started to read more, I started to really soak in as much information as I could. And I wanted to connect with other people who had the same interest as I did. And so I began talking to other people via social media about, hey, how can I get into paleontology, even though I'm not necessarily on an academic route going to a 4 year school at the moment? So I realized that getting connected with people in social media and basically having really good mentors allowed me to soak in a lot more information. And I really became interested in learning as much as I could. I spent hours in the libraries, public libraries and school libraries, checking out books on biology, geology, a little bit of chemistry. And I really wanted to try to be able to understand the subjects without having any formal training. And so I realized that that particular route for me was a route that I could be a lot more comfortable with. And it was a route that I could at least have a little bit more be a little bit more different from the other people that I was communicating with, because you definitely feel like you're not as much knowledgeable, especially when you don't have a PhD or you don't have a degree at a particular age. And I realized that maybe I could be different. Maybe I could figure out a way. So I really wanted to do something a lot different. And I realized that I will have some trouble getting into a PhD program or to other programs in general through an academic route. So I began to teach myself as much as I could about the subjects of biology, geology, chemistry, in order for me to get up to date with the science in the subjects of geoscience.
Wow, Cam, thank you so much for being so open and sharing and educating us on the fact that there are different pathways to achieve our geoeducation goals.
Yes, absolutely. There's this stigma in science that in order to be a good scientist, you have to go down a particular academic route. And maybe that is true for some people, but having an education is important to me. And I have definitely realized that being self taught in this field has given me advantages that some people with PhDs don't have advantages in, such as communication.
That's an incredible perspective. Thank you for that. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to find mentors, and certainly yours is what we could describe as like a non-traditional route. Have you found that in expressing your desire to work in the field, that people who were in more traditional academic routes were receptive to that idea?
Yeah, so I've gotten a lot of people who kind of look at it both ways. So there's this stigma where, of course, having a PhD will, or at least having a degree of some matter, will allow you to get further into the field of sciences. And that perspective is true. But I have realized that having a good knowledge base in paleontology or just really in science in general has helped me. And some of the people that I have talked to who are on very similar routes as I am have shared very similar stories about having great mentors and having people who understand the subject matter a heck of a lot better than you do will allow you to understand more of the sciences a lot better.
Thank you. So for all listeners who may not be aware of just what paleontology is, could you use plain language to kind of explain some of those concepts and maybe tell us what aspects of paleontology you are most focused on?
Yes. So paleontology is the science that focuses on fossils. So in particular, it can work on anything, or paleontologists can work on anything from like a dinosaur to small, simple microorganisms. So it encompasses around 3.5 billion years of Earth's history. And that can include the organisms, that can include the climatic history of a particular environment, and that can just include understanding the evolution of organisms through time, which is really good for us to understand how life has changed throughout Earth's history. This can also be looking at mass extinctions. So, how extinctions have caused organisms through time to go extinct through over hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. So, there are very specific avenues within paleontology that a lot of scientists specifically focus on. For myself, I am more into invertebrate paleontology, and that focuses on organisms that don't have a backbone or don't have a vertebral column. And I mostly focus on marine invertebrates, specifically from the Mesozoic, which is during the age of dinosaurs, or the Paleozoic, which is before the age of dinosaurs.
Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, we understand there are various branches of paleontology, and you're specifically interested in invertebrate paleontology. What really got you to narrow down and choose that as your niche or your subject matter that you're becoming an expert in?
Yes, a really good question. I know as a kid, I was always introduced fossils. And so one of the fossils, or most of the fossils that I was introduced to, were invertebrate fossils. So that can include anything like corals or really anything without a backbone. And so I realized that there's a lot more wiggle room in invertebrate paleontology than there really is studying things like dinosaurs or mammals or things like that. And a lot of the fossils that I was collecting happened to be invertebrate fossils anyway. And so that really drew me into wanting to understand invertebrate paleontology and doing a lot more collecting with those particular types of fossils and educating the public on a particular field in paleontology that is not as popular as, say, some of the dinosaur research that is currently going on right now.
Well, that's super exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about the fossils that you look at?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the fossils that I look at are fossils specifically from two types of time periods way before the age of dinosaurs. So the first time period that the fossils that I'm looking at come from is the Cambrian period, which is the first period within the Paleozoic. So this is around 538 million years old or so to around 490 or 483 million years old or so. And that's when we really start to see the increase in diversity within the fossil record. So we see things like biomineralization, which is the process and organisms will secrete particular minerals throughout the seawater to have much more harder skeletons for protection. And fossils can include things like trilobites, it can include things like sponges, for example. And these are some of the earliest forms that we see in the fossil record. Another particular time period that I focus on is the Ordovician period. Both the Cambrian and the Ordovician period have these two large biodiversification events. So in the Cambrian, it was the Cambrian explosion or the Cambrian radiation event, also in the Ordovician, it was the Ordovician biodiversification event. And these were very similar biological events that have happened within Earth's history. And so I look at the fossils from both time periods. And it's really told us a lot of information about the environment in which things have changed through time, as well as the organisms themselves, how organisms through the Cambrian have changed, as well as that extinction that goes on, and then how organisms have transitioned from the Cambrian throughout to the Ordovician period.
So, Cam, you mentioned biomineralization, and we see this like, explosion in terms of fossils being preserved around the Cambrian. What exactly does it take for an organism to be transformed into a fossil?
Yes, so it really does take a good amount of preservation. A lot of the fossils that we see is just what has been preserved in the fossil record. It is actually really hard to form fossils in general, and you're going to need a really good skeleton. So anything that has a hard part, such as teeth, bones, or things of that nature, are going to be a lot more easier to preserve rather than things that don't have skeletons at all. So that's why we see a bias in the fossil record where we have a lot more organisms that are being preserved that have much more hard, rigid skeleton, exoskeleton, or endoskeleton, rather than having being soft bodied. So that's what you need: a hard skeleton, whether that is an internal skeleton or an external skeleton. Now, there are some cases where soft bodied fossils can be preserved, and those are rare. Having a hard skeleton or having a hard body part is really good for having or becoming a fossil. So that's number one. Number two is the particular environment in which fossilization can occur. And so being preserved in like sand, silt are really good indications that you might end up becoming a fossil. So the preservation or the environment in which that can happen is also very important. And number three would probably be low oxygen level. So if you're in an environment that has low oxygen, or an anaerobic environment, that is actually going to be a really good place for your body part to be preserved as a fossil in general. So hard parts are really good. The place in which the preservation can occur, and then having a low oxygen environment, all of those in combination will be really good for yourself to become a fossil. Now, even though that those particular things are in combination to be a fossil, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to become a fossil in general, because the rate in which fossilization can occur varies. So all of those three combinations have a really good possibility of something to become a fossil over time, but it's not guaranteed.
So it sounds like a bit like the Goldilocks problem. You need the right combination of things to make everything work.
Correct.
In light of that, do you have any special locations where all of these conditions were met and you find lots of fossils? Could you tell us about some of the areas where you do field work and maybe what fossils you found there?
Yes, absolutely. So some of the places that I go to, I've gone through places up in Northwest Georgia. So that's where I sort of do a lot of my specialization. I work on the Paleozoic fossils of Northwest Georgia. And those rocks up there are limestones and shales. So or rocks that were deposited in ancient shallow seas. And so that can include things like brachiopods, corals, trilobites, bryozoans. I've collected in places such as Missouri And there are a variety of different fossils, mostly marine rocks from those same time periods, from like the Ordovician or from the Carboniferous period, where we do find lots of marine rocks like cherts, limestone, shales that have an abundance of fossils within them. So a lot of the places that I go to are filled with marine rocks that have really good fossils in them. But I've also traveled places up into the Kentucky area, and the Kentucky area has an incredible amount of fossils. Not just the Kentucky area in general, but just the overall places like Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. And there is a group of rocks known as the Cincinnatian series. And this is a group of rocks that date back to the late Ordovician, so around 450 million years old or so. And these rocks, again, are the same sort of rocks, the limestones, the shales, but we really do see a high abundance of marine fossils like brachiopods, trilobites, bryozoans, crinoids. And so those are a lot of the fossils that I collect and I study are the marine fossils. And it's a lot easier to collect these particular places because the marine rocks are all over where you are. It actually makes up the basement rock of some of these places where it's just limestones and shales. And so that you have a much more better accessibility to getting to these rocks and collecting a lot more of the fossils that are found in them.
Thank you so much, Cameron. This has been so enlightening. I feel like I am learning or being reminded of so much regarding paleontology since I don't get to dabble as much based off of what I work on. But with that being said, and how clearly and effectively you've communicated it, I have to kind of segue a little bit and ask you, along with the work that you do, what's next? Do you see yourself in that SciComm space, geoeducation space? What are you thinking?
So I definitely do want to be able to communicate science a lot more better. I'm still learning how to do it. I mean, I'm not an expert at communicating, so I do want to learn as much as I can to communicate science a lot better. But I would love to do this for a living, somehow make it to where I can share my collection with others and talk about the geology of the state or just paleontology in general. But I also see myself doing research as well. What I'm working on right now is I'm working on a lecture on reef systems through time. So understanding or looking at the variety of different reef building organisms through geologic time. So that's one lecture that I'm giving or I'm working on wanting to present right now. And I have also been dabbling in a little bit of academic work as well. 2 years ago, I published or co-authored my very first scientific paper on a particular shark tooth that was discovered in Northwest Georgia. Now, when I say shark, you may be thinking like great white shark or megalodon or things like that, but these aren't particularly the sharks that you may see today. These are really old, extinct relatives of sharks. This particular tooth was discovered by a good friend of mine named Dr. Brad DeLine from the University of West Georgia. He is an invertebrate paleontologist, but he was doing field work up in Northwest Georgia and found a tooth, had it for a couple of years, and then it wasn't until me, Dr. John Paul Hodnett, and Dr. Ryan Shell decided it would be great to write up a particular paper. And this is the oldest chondrichthyan, which is the group where sharks are in, but this is the oldest chondrichthyan tooth discovered in Northwest Georgia. And it's the oldest vertebrate, I believe, from the Appalachian Basin. And so there's a lot of really cool things that are going on with research that I want to do. Another particular thing is that I want to work on archaeocyathid sponges. So I have a variety of different pockets that I want to do, whether it's science communication, whether it's research. I haven't decided what I really want to hone on or focus on at the moment because I'm still trying to figure out things, what I want to do. But I've juggled with a variety of different things, whether that is science communication, being an invertebrate paleontology collections manager, or doing research, or I could possibly do all three. You never know.
Can't see a reason why not. But Tom, I just want to follow up on something that you said. So you mentioned that you found this really, really old shark tooth in the Appalachian Basin, right?
Yes, my friend Dr. Brad DeLine found the tooth.
Thank you for the correction. So describe that for all listeners. Is it like an ocean right now, or is this on land? And if so, how does that happen?
So it was ocean at one point. So just to give a little context, Northwest Georgia is composed of rocks that were deposited by ancient seas from around 500 million years ago to around 200 million years ago. So there's a lot of wiggle room in regards to the geologic history that's in that part of this, and that's in that part of the state. So we have a variety of different fossils. Most of the fossils that is found in that particular part of the state are all marine, but vertebrate fossils are almost unheard of. And it wasn't until that Dr. Brad DeWine found that tooth that there happens to be just a small pocket of rocks, mostly shells, that have vertebrate fossils in them. And I wasn't aware of that at the time. I didn't know that there were any vertebrate fossils in Northwest Georgia at all. And it wasn't until that tooth was found and I was being told about it that I realized that maybe this is definitely be something that can be a part of a research topic. So the tooth was found within the Lavender Shell member in the Fort Payne Formation. And the Fort Payne Formation is basically the base of the Carboniferous period. And in North America, the Carboniferous period is broken down into two parts, the Mississippian period and then the Pennsylvanian period. The Mississippian period is mostly composed, or it's where we have the highest deposition of shales, the highest deposition of carbonate rocks like limestones. But we also find siliciclastics like cherts, for example. But we do find a lot of variety of rocks that are found in that area, but they mostly contain carbonates. But when we were in that particular area, we were finding an abundance of brachiopods and sponges. And it was the realization that there was a vertebrate fauna assemblage occurring in those rocks. And so that became a research topic, and we eventually published that paper in October of 2022.
Cameron, I just love the fact that even though you did not take the traditional route, or you haven't taken a traditional route, which is going through the academic rigor, that you are still doing amazing things in the paleontology world. The fact that you're getting out there, you're getting the field experience, you're publishing, and you're working with some real powerhouses. So, if it's not too much trouble, I would love to ask, what would you tell past CAM or future students or persons interested in paleontology who may be later in their career or restarting, anyone who's wanting to experience or take that non-traditional path like you did? What's your advice for them?
I would say it's very difficult to take a non-traditional path in the paleontology. It's definitely different from what other people may think of when you hear of a paleontologist. Because when you think of a paleontologist, you think of a person that may be working in a university or someone who has, a PhD, working in a museum. And those are all good examples of a paleontologist, but exactly the that's not exactly all the routes that you can to become a scientist or a paleontologist. And so I would recommend people to definitely read as much as you can. Go out to the library, go to bookstores, pick up books on geology, paleontology, chemistry, any information that you can that will help you to get a sense of understanding of the natural world. So reading is important, but also having the opportunity of getting yourself into museums and or doing any volunteer work at a school. I grew up without having any of those opportunities within paleontology at all. And it really wasn't until where I moved in a different area and I got connected with a amateur rock group known as the Georgia Mineral Society that I began giving my first lectures, that I began going on my first digs. And then I also branched off into wanting to make more connections. So the other thing is making really good connections. Ask people from universities or ask people from like other paleontologists that you meet online. It really wasn't until that I started to create a Facebook or create any social media platform that I got connected with other paleontologists, and they helped me. They gave me papers, basically kind of molded me into the person that I am today. And I eventually got to meet these particular people in person because I was able to go to some of these scientific conferences. And many of the people that I had connected when I was maybe like, I don't know, maybe 14 years old, have funded my trips to go out to the Geological Society of America to give my first talk, or back in 2018 or 2019, and then funding my trip to go out to the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology back in 2022. I'm sorry, 2023, and meeting some of these people that I really looked up to and I got to talk to and watched me grow since I was 13. And it's really having those good connections with scientists and building a relationship with scientists that will help you further your pathway into this particular field. I remember Dr. Jim Kirkland from, he's a state paleontologist of Utah. And ever since I was like 13, he was telling me a lot of the things that I could do in order to be a good paleontologist. And I met him um, for the first time in person back in 2023. And it was that really good realization that yeah, you're really doing a great job into this profession, even though you don't have even though that you have a non-traditional route in paleo. So number one is just making really good connections. And I would say don't give up. There are a lot of things that I am facing at the moment that I realize that are hard for me. And I realize that I can become a good scientist even with these struggles that I deal with on a daily basis. So it sounds cliche, I know, but definitely don't give up on the things that you're interested in, and it will be a benefit in the long run.
Cameron, thank you for those solid nuggets of advice. So, definitely look at professional development, such as clubs, organizations, seek out mentorship, and be really persistent. Dig your heels in and try to learn as much as possible and make those network connections and follow through with them. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come. So, on that note, as we get to the end of our time today, we like to finish with something fun, and we call it the volcanic fault. So, we're just going to ask you some quick questions and tell us the first thing that comes to mind. Ready?
Yes,
Okay. First question, brachiopods or trilobites?
trilobites, 100%. I have a trilobite tattoo, actually. So trilobites.
It's my favorite too. Next question, fantasy or science fiction?
I would have to go on science fiction. Science fiction has always been one of my favorite things to look at as a kid. I would watch the Sci-Fi Channel, stay up with my dad watching the Sci-Fi Channel. So I would have to go with sci-fi.
Two for two. I'm loving it.
I don't know though. I'm becoming a fantasy girly of late because I've been reading a lot of fantasy series in between journal articles. But I'll let you gentlemen have it.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I like fantasies. I've been obsessed with dragons and like the medieval culture, but I don't know. There's something about science fiction that I really like.
I can dig it, pun intended. Last but not least, Queen or Metallica?
Oh, that's a good one. I like both.
Gotta go with the first one that comes to mind.
I do like Queen. I will say, okay, I'm gonna have to go with Queen. I do. I love Metallica, but I have to go with Queen. There's just so many classics with Queen.
Perfect. Well, Cameron, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a delightful and a very enlightening episode. But that's all we have for today. To our audience members who are joining us, we'd like to thank you as always for keeping the conversation going. If you have ideas also on what you'd like to hear, please don't hesitate to contact us. If you have any questions about geoscience, maybe some natural disasters, why they're occurring more commonly, or perhaps you're just curious about how the physical world works, feel free to send us your questions or your ask, and we'll do our best to unearth the answers you seek. Tweet us at Podcast. We still use Twitter. We still call it Twitter. Email us at the geotrippodcast at gmail.com. And don't forget, geoscience is everywhere around us. So next time you're outside, look at the rocks, the mountains, or even the ground beneath your feet. There's a whole story written in stone just waiting to be unraveled. See you on the next episode of the GeoTrip. Cameron and Kyron, thank you so much. We're out.